Live from the hippest spot online, you've arrived at the Pop Culture Juke Joint, the only weekly podcast you'll need for intelligent showbiz chats. So head up to the bar, grab a drink, and settle in here at the Pop Culture Juke Joint.
Hi, my name is Jack Lugo, and you are listening to the Pop Culture Juke Joint. Today, I am going to talk about the premiere of Star Trek Discovery. CBS has decided to roll this out in a very unique way, so let me just talk about that first before I get into the episode. Basically, if you're a Star Trek fan, you've heard about this, but I'm just going to go over it very quickly. CBS has launched their streaming service, CBS-All Access, and it's a subscription-based platform. And Star Trek is kind of the show that they're kind of hanging their hopes on to sort of launch the service. I mean, they have a spin-off of The Good Wife on there that, as far as I know, isn't really doing much. And there are a few other things that they're doing on that platform, but Star Trek Discovery is kind of the main selling point. At this point, I'm sure they are going to develop more shows, but it's a tricky situation because obviously, like what they're doing with Star Trek Discovery is that they're using the network, the regular CBS network, to air the pilot, and then they're hoping that you watch and decide to subscribe if you're a Star Trek fan based on that, and then all the episodes are going to air on the CBS All Access streaming platform that requires a subscription. So I know a lot of Star Trek fans were not happy about that when they first heard about it. I happened to sign on just to give it a chance, and I'm glad I did, but I could certainly understand why some fans might be reluctant to do so, because obviously there's so many subscription-based services. You have your Netflix, you have your Hulu and Amazon Prime. Do you really want another bill to add, and especially if it's just really for one show? I mean, unless there's a Star Trek fan out there who's really into the Good Wife spinoff, which there might be. But it is kind of a unique thing that they're withholding, if you will, a Star Trek series from airing on their network. Normally, this would be kind of, if we weren't into this new era of streaming, normally this would just air on the CBS network, and the show would either live or die based on the ratings. And I think Star Trek is the last show, Star Trek Enterprise, was canceled prematurely after 4 seasons, and I think there's been a lot of hesitation and reluctance to kind of bring Star Trek back to TV. So I think this is kind of a way with streaming to sort of get a Star Trek series back on the airwaves, where I think Star Trek is at its best in the TV shows, because obviously it has the movies and the current series of movies starring Chris Pine, and the reboot, if you will, of the original series characters. That's its own thing, and the movies in general have always been kind of more or less about they've kind of stood apart from the series. I think that Star Trek is at its best when it's on TV because it explores the sci-fi stories and some of the more complex moral and ethical issues that Star Trek gets into, and sometimes that gets lost a little bit in the movies, even though they try to bring that forward at times. So I guess CBS is hoping that Star Trek fans tuned in for that series, for the pilot, which they aired which is I don't know. I mean, I'll get to my feelings about the pilot in a minute, but this is really, they aired episode 1, which they're calling the pilot for Star Trek Discovery, but really the pilot is 2 episodes, and what they did was they kind of and most of the historically most of the Star Trek pilots have been longer than an hour, so they aired episode 1 and they kind of left it at a cliffhanger, so you didn't right at the point where it was about to have a major confrontation. That episode ended, and then you're told, okay, for episode 2 you now have to go on to CBS-All Access and you can view episode 2 if you're a subscriber. I don't know if that strategy worked, because I think I understand that they want to get subscribers for the platform, but I really think that they should have just aired the 2 episodes back to back. Just give Star Trek 2 hours, and then maybe you could have said, okay, episode 3, or the next episode is now available to stream on the platform, because that first episode, you're introduced to these new characters, and you're kind of just getting your bearings when stuff happens, and the way the episode ends, obviously it ends in a way that you're gonna be curious as to what happens next, and I guess that's the whole point. But I feel like maybe give the fans a little bit more, especially the ones who were kind of on the fence about subscribing to another platform. So I watched both episodes. I did decide. I did subscribe to the CBS All Access, and I really think they did a phenomenal job. It remains to be seen, because this series has had a few production issues. Brian Fuller wrote the pilot, which I think he is credited with writing episodes 1 and 2. So I'm thinking episodes 1 and 2 are really one pilot episode, and they just decided to split it up and call it episode 1 and episode 2. But Brian Fuller was removed or asked to leave because CBS felt that he was his attention to his other projects kind of outweighed his commitment to Star Trek. But Brian Fuller, I think, developed the concept for this series, and I'm going to get into that for a little bit. Basically, we were kind of teased leading up to the premiere that this was going to be focused on an area of Star Trek lore that fans have known about for quite some time, but it hasn't really been shown in detail. And I think when we first saw that there was going to be a huge Klingon presence in the pilot, while they were teasing with the trailers, a lot of fans got very confused about the look of the Klingons in this show, and I was kind of taken aback by that too. But I just decided, I know there's been a few things that they've kind of put out there as to why the Klingons look different, but if you want to focus on that, then you're really going to lose what the episode is trying to do. And in the little after show that they have after the series, they spoke to one of the writers, Aaron Harberts, I think, and basically his reasoning for that is that they wanted to differentiate the Klingons for their series, which I guess they just want something. They want to have the Klingons look distinctive for this show, and maybe there'll be some kind of in-universe explanation, or maybe they won't be. I'm not going to get too hung up on that, but basically, this show goes into the conflict or war, if you will, between the Federation and the Klingons, and kind of shows you what precipitated the kind of antagonistic relationship that the Federation has with the Klingons that you see in the original series, and going forward, you know that there's this adversarial relationship, but you've never seen what the initial conflict, what the battles were like when this was an active conflict. So. You're introduced to Michael Burnham, played by Sonequa Martin-Green, who's phenomenal in this. And she was raised by Vulcans and went to the Vulcan Institute, but she's a human, and she has a history. You're sort of shown that she at an early age was, I believe, she was orphaned. After a Klingon attack, so she's predisposed to not trusting Klingons. But in this series actually this is yet another prequel. This takes place about 100 years after Star Trek Enterprise, the series starring Scott Bakula, and about 10 years before the original series. So in Star Trek Enterprise, in the pilot, as a matter of fact, the crew does encounter the Klingons, but that story sort of ended without, the whole point of the was to avoid the conflict. So we didn't really see an all-out battle. That we do see in this episode, and Michael Burnham has this sort of mentorship. Michael Burnham is mentored by Michelle Yeoh's character, Captain Jojo, and they're serving on the USS Shenzhou, and they encounter an anomaly, a phenomenon, and basically the way that their ship operates is very similar to what we're familiar with, having seen Star Trek. They when they encounter an anomaly, they investigate. They form scientific. They do like a scientific exploration of what's going on, and you have a really some really good sequences with Michael Burnham's going out with the spacesuit and getting close to the anomaly, and she discovers that it's in fact a ship of some kind, like an ancient Klingon ship, and she has a violent encounter with a Klingon out in space, and it results in the Klingon getting killed. And obviously, there's that sequence where they're trying to rescue, where the ship is trying to rescue her. And then, basically, as soon as she knows that she's encountered a Klingon, once she wakes up in sickbay, she, rushes to the bridge and explains what's happening to her captain, and her captain wants to kind of proceed in, a diplomatic way, to sort of, if there are Klingons, let's try to talk to them, let's hail them. That's kind of like the standard procedure that we're used to seeing in Star Trek. And of course, Michael Burnham is the first officer, and she commits an act of mutiny. Because she, when she questions the captain's orders, and the captain decides not to take her advice, they go into the ready room, and she does the Vulcan neck pinch on her captain. But apparently, Michael Burnham didn't quite effectively do the Vulcan neck pinch, because Michelle Yeoh's character just kind of wakes up in 5 minutes, and basically the episode ends with the first episode ends with the all these Klingon ships beginning to arrive because the leader of the flagship Klingon ship has sort of lit this beacon to get all the houses of the Klingon Empire together, and his intention is to unite the entire Klingon Empire and all the different houses. So basically, you're kind of led to believe that before this encounter, the Klingons were kind of scattered. All the different houses kind of were, they were kind of like tribal, and maybe, they weren't all united. And that's probably why maybe the Federation, Starfleet, hadn't really had any kind of violent or encounters with them up until this point. But the leader of the flagship of the Klingons, T'Kunva, I believe his name is, he wants to unite all the houses. So the episode ends with all these Klingon ships arriving, and they're about to confront the USS Shenzhou, and the USS Shenzhou has also put out a distress signal for Starfleet ships to come and help them. And you get the sense that obviously there's going to be a battle, but the first episode ends right before the battle begins. Commander Burnham is put into the brig for her act of mutiny, and basically she loses the trust of her captain at that point. Even though basically what had happened was she communicated with Sarek, and Sarek explained the Vulcan method of how they were able to kind of maintain some kind of amicable relationship with the Klingons, Commander Burnham basically took that advice and decided to try to get the USS Shenzhou to fire first, because the Klingons would respect the show of strength. And I don't know that plan would have worked. It probably would have backfired tremendously. So this whole idea that that she has of like, well, I was trying to save the ship. I understand where she's coming from, but something tells me that if she had succeeded and the Shenzhou fired first, that they probably would have been, they probably would have had to engage in a very, in a battle anyway. So basically, I do have mixed feelings about the idea of, taking a pilot, because the pilot really should be one complete story. And I know, Star Trek is trying, with this series, they want to, do character arcs and make it all interconnected, which is great. I mean, I was a huge fan of Deep Space Nine, and that's what Deep Space Nine did. I mean, before Deep Space Nine, Star Trek was very episodic, and aside from like the two-parters and so forth, each episode had a beginning, middle, and end, and, you would kind of like take the characters and, out of a toy box and then play with them and put them back, and, nothing really changed. I mean, this series, you get the sense that there is going to be some development and some story development, story arcs and character arcs that are going to take place over the course of the whole season, and that's a great thing. I'm excited about that, because I haven't really fell in love with a Star Trek series since Deep Space Nine, and that was the primary reason why I enjoyed Deep Space Nine. I mean, Deep Space Nine kind of evolved from what it was originally. It sort of, once it got into the plot, the third season, and the plot with the Dominion, and then when season 4 started and they brought in Worf, the story, the writing really went up a huge notch, and I think the writing for this show, from what I've seen, is pretty good. I mean, I think if you're a Star Trek fan, there's plenty to like. Now, I did tune in for the second part, and for episode 2, and I am going to go into spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it. You do have you don't get to see the Discovery, which to me, obviously just reinforces the idea that these 2 episodes were really one pilot. Basically, it continues the story from where the first episode left off, and you have Commander Burnham trapped on the brig, and the ship has now been under attack, and she has to figure out a way to get out of it. Has this bond with Sarek, Spock's father, and you have the whole notion of Sarek's katra being inside of her, which obviously we saw in Star Trek, the films, in Star Trek 3 into Star Trek and Star Trek 2 into Star Trek 3, where Spock had his katra input into Dr. McCoy, and you saw that that kind of bond exists between Sarek and Michael Burnham. So that kind of maybe that makes Michael Burnham, and it would be interesting to see if they have some kind of if they do get into the relationship between Sarek and Michael Burnham, and I'm led to believe that they will, because I believe the actor who plays Sarek in this series is going to return for a number of episodes. So she's trapped in the brig. The ship is engaging the Klingons. The other Federation ships are also engaging the Klingons, and you do see, the hesitation on the part of. You do see part of the Klingon side of things, because the other houses of the Klingon Empire were also kind of, they weren't sure what this was about, and you have Tecumva kind of explain what his goals are, and he wants to be the one to unite all the Klingon houses, and it does take some convincing on his part in order to convince the other houses to go along with it. But they have this battle, and basically Commander Burnham is able to escape from the brig, and they hatch up a plan in order to basically once the USS Europa is destroyed and the admiral who was in command of the fleet is killed, they hatch up a plan to capture Tecumva rather than kill him or destroy the ship that he's on, because of some of the background knowledge that they have from Klingons is that if you kill a Klingon, you're kind of making them a martyr, and it makes the rest of their people even more committed to the cause than they were before. But if you capture him, you make him a victim, and you make him look weak. And that was the plan that they hatched up. You do get a little bit of background, also some flashbacks about focusing on Michael Burnham's and Captain Philippa Georgiou's kind of relationship. I mean, they kind of do have a little bit of that, Kirk and Spock friendship, because they have served together for 7 years, and I really like how they did that. I mean, because you think they really Star Trek isn't just about like commanding officers and the people under their command and giving orders. It's also about the relationships between the characters, and the main relationship that you get in these two episodes is really focused around Michelle Yeoh's character and Sonequa Martin-Green's characters. And at first you're not quite sure what that relationship is, and it does kind of solidify in that second episode. You get to see a flashback to when Michael Burnham is first brought on to the USS Shenzhou, and it's obviously 7 years prior to the events going on, and you get a sense of what their relationship, what the mentoring was like, and the kind of evolution that each of those characters had gone through up until that point in relation to each other. So kudos for that. I mean, because I think even though things kind of happen that kind of I don't know if we're going to see Michelle Yeoh again, but it does, solidify the fact that that relationship was important to her, and then you get the sense that going forward that once Michelle Yeoh's character is killed, that is a real loss for Michael Burnham. So you get to feel that. So I think that was definitely important. So they hatch up the plan to invade the Klingon ship, and Burnham and Captain Jojo, they go onto they transport onto the Klingon vessel, and they try to capture Tecumseh, but they're not successful, and Captain Jojo is killed and impaled, and Commander Burnham is transported back onto the Shenzhou, and she faces the consequence of going before a tribunal and having her command stripped because of the act of mutiny that she committed in the first episode. So that's how it kind of leaves off, and you don't get to see the Discovery. Obviously, in the previews, you get in the very next episode, that the Discovery, that you are going to get scenes on that ship, and you kind of figure that Commander Burnham is going to get her that whatever sentence that she's. I believe she's sentenced for life at the end of episode 2. That that's probably not going to last very long, and that she's going to very likely join the crew of the USS Discovery. Obviously, probably as the first officer, I'm guessing. So. I'm kind of excited because it's been a long time since we had a really good, solid Star Trek show to watch. I mean, even if you were a fan of Enterprise, that show really didn't end very well. It started to get good in that 4th season, and then they had that terrible series finale. And then before that, I wasn't a big fan of Voyager, although I did follow it, and I watched I watched it while it was on, but it was not a show that I kind of fell in love with. And so the last show I fell in love with was Deep Space Nine, and then obviously I was a huge fan of Next Generation and the original series before that. So I think this new Star Trek series has a lot to offer. I just don't know if it's enough to launch a streaming platform, because no matter how good a series can be, you still, if you're depending on people subscribing and paying a fee to access it, I'm just not sure, if it's gonna work. I mean, no matter how good this series is, and for a Star Trek show, I think it's pretty good. I think the trailers that I've seen so far for the upcoming episodes, they seem very promising, and I have an idea of where it's gonna go, and I'm excited about it. I'm just not sure that unless CBS launches a few other series, I'm just not sure if it's a show that's gonna be the sole reason why, the thing to hang all the hopes of the CBS people, the executives and so forth, for people to subscribe onto this streaming platform. Especially now, people, they'll find a way to watch the episode even if they're not subscribers. So it's a huge risk. But I think overall it's a solid show. I think I like what I've seen so far. I do want to see more. So if it's a question of enticing Star Trek fans, I think they've succeeded. I just don't know if it's enough for people to go and subscribe to yet another streaming platform. Because that's a tall order, and even if it's just Star Trek fans, I don't know if that's enough. I mean, you want a show like this to get to appeal to a broader audience. You want it to appeal to to audiences who maybe never even checked out a Star Trek show before, or maybe they've seen the movies but they haven't really watched the show. There's a whole new generation, obviously, since Star Trek was at its peak in the 90s. So it remains to be seen. I'm looking forward to whatever it is that they have to offer. I know it's going to be a weekly release format, so you can't just subscribe and then binge all the episodes. You have to kind of stick with it. And I think there's even a small hiatus. I think because the episodes are going to air weekly, I think through November, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think most of December is going to be you're not going to get new episodes for most of December. I think they're splitting the season in two, essentially. So I think you're going to get new episodes from now through November, and then probably part 2 will be in January. So if you do decide to subscribe, just keep that in mind. I mean, you kind of have to, you're not going to be able to just get all the episodes and binge them like you would for other shows. So anyway, those are just my quick thoughts on Star Trek Discovery. I enjoyed it. I think most Star Trek fans will find things to like about it. I just don't know if it's enough to launch a streaming platform with. So anyway, you've been listening to the Pop Culture Juke Joint podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you're a Star Trek fan, do check out the pilot, if you will.
Enjoyed this episode of the Pop Culture Juke Joint? Then don't forget to tip the barkeep by subscribing and reviewing us on iTunes and Stitcher. Also, for some sizzling noir tales, head on over to Amazon to check out Anthony's hard-boiled fiction, available in print, digital, and audiobook formats. On social media, follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony Venutolo, or like his page on Facebook. For everything else, please visit his webpage at www.anthonyvenutolo.com. We'll see you next week.